Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're working our way through the book of Exodus, and we are halfway through.
We are.
And we are into the stuff that most people might think of more about Exodus, right? Then we've done the Exodus, and now we get into some laws.
I would think, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
True,
yeah. Well, yeah, my first thought is Exodus, getting out, right?
Out, that's true.
Yeah,
Leviticus really would be more of the laws type thing. But there are some in here.
Yeah, so last week we saw Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. He gave Moses great suggestions, right? So he went to work with him and saw what he did. And what
take your father-in-law to work day.
Yes, that's because everybody would like to have that kind of input. So Jethro saw what Moses did, and he had suggestions, and that was, you're an idiot. There's no way you're going to be able to handle all these cases. He said that. Instead, what you need to do is you need to find some good men of good moral character, appropriate people, and they should take the easy cases, and you should group them together, and then you take the hard ones.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. Yeah. And it was the start of a judicial system. And like you pointed out last week, the timing of that is a little odd because God hasn't even given the law yet.
Yeah.
And but we have the framework for it to be in.
Yeah.
So the nation follows God to Mount Sinai, and we know that we're going to be spending like a year here.
About a year. Yeah.
God comes down from heaven. He talks to Moses, and the nation dedicates themselves to God. No, we're being a little flippant here, but. Right, it was a choice.
That's what they said. Everything that the Lord says, we will do.
Right. And God gives the people what we call the Ten Commandments, really a synopsis of what the laws are going to be. And then he gave the nation a bunch of ordinances, and that's what you're talking about. Last week we started going through, and this is the start of the law.
Yeah.
And we got more of that this week.
Yeah, and this isn't everything. Exodus won't contain everything, but the rest of Exodus and all of Leviticus basically takes place at Mount Sinai. And that's really Leviticus sort of fleshes out and gets all of the details of the laws. This really sort of introduces, so 10 Commandments is high level.
Right.
Then what we see in Exodus for the next few chapters is sort of mid-level. It's like, here's a big picture of the type of stuff that we're going to be doing. And then we'll shift over into the building of the system and the buildings. And then Leviticus would go into all the little details.
Right. So an example of this is chapter 22. The first set that we have in here talks about property. What's going to happen with property. So in broad terms, if something is stolen and the thief is caught, they have to repay what they stole twice.
Yeah.
Which I think is a great law.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's appropriate considerations for, not everything, but enough to get you started.
Yeah, right.
On there. Even things on, let's talk about if livestock is stolen. What happens? What happens if livestock is killed? Well, was it killed intentionally? Yep. Was it killed accidentally? You would hope that there would be two different outcomes that come there. Or was it even killed by a wild animal?
Yeah.
What happens then?
Yeah. If a fire breaks out, was it arson? Right. Was it, just a wildfire? If restitution needed to be made, then it needed to be made, right? But some things you can't control. And so I love the fact that, it's easy to get bogged down in all the details. What I like is the fact that it shows that God cares about the details. He cares whether it was a wildfire or if it was arson. He cares if it was homicide or negligent or manslaughter or self-defense. As we go through the law, not that that's in this chapter, but just all of the different things, God cares about the distinctions between those. Right. And I think that's one of the big takeaways.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because in the next section, it talks about morale laws and ceremonial. And one of the things in there is if a man seduces a virgin.
Yeah.
Okay, now we don't have any laws yet, so it's not against the law, but God knows there's going to be a law against this, but also that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, but he's addressing it up front because part of it is they care.
Yeah.
And by the way, if a man seduces a virgin and they're not engaged, then there's a choice.
Yeah.
Right. And part of the choice comes from the father of the of the woman.
Yeah.
You know, do I want to have this man as a son-in-law or not? What happens?
Yeah, and you know, whether she wanted to be there or she called out for help or, you know, whatever.
Right.
Leviticus gets into all of those things too. There's a heading here in my Bible. It says moral or ceremonial laws.
Right.
I just want to point this out because there are some people who make a distinction and say, well, the moral law, let's say the ceremonial laws, they don't apply to us today, but the moral laws do apply, and they try to parse the law code down into, you know, all the different things, and that's just not true. I mean, the law stands and falls together, right? So were some of them more about morality, and some of them that were more about ceremony? Yes, but that doesn't mean that we get to pick and choose. You know, well, these we have to obey and these we don't. None of the law is for the church, is for Christians today, even if it says moral in your heading. You know, so.
There are some laws in here that we would consider harsh. You must not allow a sorceress to live. Mm-hmm. You must be put to death if you have had sexual relations with a beast. Whoever sacrifices to an alternate god must be put to death.
Yeah, but the reason is because they're going to be going into the land of Canaan where the pagans around them are doing these things as part of their demon worship. And God doesn't want to have doesn't want the Israelites to have anything to do with that. And if they do engage in those things, they are actually participating in demon worship and pagan worship. And that sort of, I mean, it's basically an insult to God who brought you out of Egypt, and I am your God, and no other gods before me. I mean, it violates the first one, you know, when they do these things. So it seems harsh on the outset, but when we consider the context, it's like, no, that's exactly what it should be.
In chapter 23, it talks about justice, or starts out talking about justice. And there's a couple different ways that you can think of justice. This is more along the lines of justice to all people, right? So not just the rich, not the poor, but to all people.
Yeah.
So it has things like, don't give a false report.
Yeah.
And we would see that, you know, the 9th commandment, right?
Yeah, because we're talking about lawsuits and things here too. So this is justice, not just like revenge, but like in the court of law, make sure that there's no partiality, that, you know, that sort of thing.
Right. Also, don't accept bribes. Right. But yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah. Right.
You have to say it. And then what I really like a number of times, don't oppress a resident foreigner. Remember, you were a foreigner while in Egypt.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of a cool thing there.
Yeah. A lot of people like to quote or recite or bring up verses from the Old Testament about resident foreigners, especially in our climate today of people who go into a country illegally, right? Whether it's ours or somebody else's, it doesn't really matter. The problem is that the resident foreigner that we see in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, these were people who came into Israel legally, who chose to follow the law. I want to be a part of the system that's here. I'm not trying to change the system. I'm not protesting the system. They may not have been circumcised. They may not have been able to worship at the tabernacle that's going to be built and everything. But they were resident foreigners. I mean, they were people who came to be resident in the system that already existed. They weren't breaking in, they weren't causing chaos, they weren't doing all those things. So we have to be careful misusing scripture in a climate, in a culture, and for things that it doesn't match at all, right? So.
Also talks about Sabbaths and feasts. And as part of that, it's talking about working the land, right? So the land should be worked for 6 years, and then there needs to be a rest of the land, right?
Yeah.
So a 7th year.
Yeah.
You know.
So 6 days and then a 7th day, and then 6 years and a 7th year, and then he'll later talk about seven sets,
right?
And then.
Jubilee.
The Jubilee. So you'll have your 6th, and then your 7th, and then another one, the 50th. By the time you do 7 times 7,
Yeah.
so he actually had the land, gave the land plenty of time to like fallow and
Right.
recuperate.
Right. What I also like is in that 7th year when the land is resting, there's going to be stuff that grows, right?
Yeah.
There's always stuff left over. We see in our world, farmers, there's, volunteer corn that grows. We're in Indiana, by the way, so a lot of corn, a lot of soybeans.
Yeah.
But what grows up, naturally from God without being tended to is for the poor and for the animals.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of cool.
Yep.
And then he talks about 3 pilgrimage feasts.
Yeah.
So these would be times when people were expected to drop what they're doing and actually come into Jerusalem for these feasts. Right?
Well, and it wasn't Jerusalem.
Well,
yet,
at this
but
time,
wherever the place of worship was,
good point.
is it was the males, right? These are the males, the Jewish men, and the Passover.
Right.
And
first one. Also the unleavened
plus
bread.
the following week of unleavened bread. Right. Then you get 50 days after Passover is Pentecost, which is the Feast of First Fruits. Right. And those are both spring. And then you get into fall, which is the end of the harvest. And now you have what's called the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles to Sukkot. And same thing. So now we're celebrating the end of the harvest. So the beginning of the harvest and the end of the harvest is a time to worship God. And it was mandatory. This is why when we go into the Gospels, we see at Passover an influx of people in Jerusalem and at Pentecost and then in the fall as well. Yeah.
Right. In this chapter, God says he's going to send an angel to protect you on your journey. Mm-hmm. So we know that so far God has protected Israel, took them through the Red Sea, and now God is saying he's going to send an angel. Mm-hmm. So does this replace God here?
I think it's we would call it the angel of the Lord. I think it's the pre-incarnate Jesus, right?
And that was not before?
Probably not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because with the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, there was God's presence and God's glory, but I don't think it was like the person. Okay. Well, I mean, showing up as a person, right?
Right.
Here it specifically says in verse 21, he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him, right? I have to think that's God himself, right?
Well, it also says, he will not pardon your transgressions. Yeah. Right. I mean, an angel is not going to forgive.
Yeah, I don't think an angel has the capacity to be able to do that, right?
Yeah. It also says, if you obey him, notice the if, he will go down before you and destroy all your adversaries. You must not bow down to their gods. Again, what you're talking about, you're going into a foreign land.
Yep.
Don't take on their gods. A lot more discussion, and it ends with never make a covenant with the adversaries or their gods, right? So you're going to go into all the ites. They need to be separate. Yeah. You're not intended to be living with these people.
Yep.
And then in chapter 24, where we end, so Moses and Aaron and a number of other people, including the 70 elders of Israel, they went up and they met the Lord. Mm-hmm. And Moses reported back down to the people, and this is what you were saying. The people were willing to do all the words that the Lord said. We are willing. And Moses wrote down all the words and built an altar with 12 standing stones for the 12 tribes. And these would be intentionally rudimentary, right? This is not something that is being built. It's being built for God, but out of things that are there, not things that are man-made.
Yeah.
Which we will see coming up, I think, next week.
Yeah.
There was burnt offerings and sacrifices of young bulls, and Moses put half the blood on the altar, and we're going to see that this will come into the sacrifices and the covering of sins.
And this was still the initial altar.
This is pre.
Yeah, this is the initial altar that they put together, right? This isn't the new one that's going to be built yet, yeah.
Right. So he took the book of the covenant, so this would have been the words that he wrote down, and read it aloud to the people, and the people were saying, we will obey. Yeah. Moses splashed blood on the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant. Now, to me, those words sounded very familiar. Mm-hmm. when we celebrate communion, those are generally also said. Is there a tie-in here?
No, because I mean, a lot of covenants were ratified with blood. Wasn't a big deal from that. Jesus said that his blood was the blood of the new covenant, and but you remember that Jesus wasn't celebrating communion; he was celebrating Passover, which was from back. So he's looking forward to the kingdom. It doesn't have anything. This is why we usually read it when we celebrate communion from 1 Corinthians, not from one of the Gospels, because the Gospels focus more on that because it's at Passover with a Jewish audience. Paul isn't focusing on the blood of the covenant; it's just the blood and the body in there.
Right. We end this week with Moses and the others that went up to God. They saw the God of Israel, and under his feet was something like pavement made of sapphire and clear like the sky.
Now, this is cool.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to say too. So this is cool. not I don't live for this, of course, but the idea of we get a glimpse into heaven, right, and what's there, and we always hear, okay, the streets are paved with gold. Okay, great, but there's some pavement there that God is walking on, made of sapphires. Yeah, it's clear, and I have no idea what that looks like, but you can kind of.
So here's the thing, though. Right? Here's the thing, is if you go to Revelation 4, John sees God on the throne, and in front of him there is what looks to be a sea of crystal or glass.
So matching up.
And that's exactly what they saw here, and it's also what Ezekiel saw in Ezekiel chapter 1.
Right.
And there's the cherubim above and below this, and so it's, I mean, from Exodus to Ezekiel to Revelation, the picture of God's throne room is the same.
Yeah, same. Three different points of view.
3 points of view, 3 writers so far apart, 1,500 years. And it's the same thing. I think that's very cool.
It is. I just like the descriptions too. Moses and Joshua went up higher. They received the stone tablets, 10 commandments. Moses then spends 40 days and nights with God. And we end our reading for this week. So there's a ton in here. Yeah. I mean, stuff is really starting to take off.
Yeah, some pretty cool stuff. So hopefully you find that interesting, especially the connections with other places in the Bible that we've been able to point out. We're starting to get good. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, we've had some good stuff with the Exodus and everything, but now it's starting to, it's taking a sort of a twist almost.
Yeah. Well, it's this nation, right? A couple million people. How are you going to act? What are you going to do? Who are you guys? Yeah.
Well, this is our end point for this week. If you have questions or comments, make sure you put those there in the comments or send them to us. Subscribe if you haven't, and make sure that you send it to other people as well so they can do the same thing. We'll pick up here next time, and we'll start to see a building project here in the book of Exodus.
Bye, everybody.